Hi, everyone. My name's Troy McClure, and you may know me from such films as Paint Chips, Delicious but Deadly. But actually, this is Causal Islands Podcast EP02, or the audio version of podcasts live in Discord that we experiment with because Twitter Spaces are icky. Today, in episode 2, we are going to be talking with Strange Loop founder Alex Miller and all of the Papers We Love founders, along with our usual Causal Islands co-host, aside from myself, Boris Mann from Fission, is Zishan, who is enmeshed in all of this stuff. So I will mostly hand it over to Zishan and ask noob questions, because this is going to be my first year at Strange Loop and Papers We Love, and I'm super excited. Take it away, Zishan.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, cool. First year of I guess say last year, which is this is an interesting thing we'll talk about. Boris, before we get into some questions and stuff, yeah, I guess people can ask things as quickly as you want as we go here. So just raise your hand, and we'll make sure you get a chance to speak and ask questions as people join up. Yeah, hello everybody. Hello, really, I'm really excited to have the Papers We Love crew here, the people that I've known for way too long, and then Alex Miller, who now I feel like I've known for for a long time as well. So I think maybe to start things off, I think this would be good and I'll point to Alex first here. Maybe a little bit of history of Strange Loop, and then we can do a little bit on PWL and then how these things all kind of met together. So Alex, do you want to give us a little bit of the how we got here?
Sure. Hello. So Strange Loop, I'll try to give you the medium description. So not the short or the long, but in the middle.
Right.
I had gotten interested in functional programming and dynamic languages and NoSQL databases and things like that. There were not a lot of great places. Well, there were a lot of very fragmented places in St. Louis to talk about that stuff. And I kind of pulled them all together into one big tent group called Lambda Lounge. And it was like regularly 50 to 100 people meeting every month. And so I was like, well, this seems like it could be a conference. And there's no like cool conference in St. Louis. And why doesn't everybody come to my town and have a conference? So that was kind of the spark of starting a conference. I thought I can surely get together 150 people to come talk about software for 2 days or something like that.
And what was the first year of Strange Loop?
2009 was the first year.
2009, right? And so, how many people did you have that first year, if you remember?
So, I planned for 150, and I had 300. So clearly there was interest.
Yeah, and then what at the most you've had now over 2,000?
Yeah, I think 2017 or 2018. Those were kind of the peak years, and I think our max was probably somewhere around 2,200 or 2,300, something like that.
I had no idea. I thought I was heading into a cozy little 250 person conference.
No, we'll be 1,700 this year. So.
Yeah, that's yeah. I think that's showcasing of the success, and obviously we'll get more into general conference stuff. I guess just to maybe a little intro. I'll let like David or Darren do it since I'm kind of co-hosting, though I can jump in. So I think there's obviously an interesting mesh and combination of when Papers We Love. We started doing the conference with Stranger, but I think it was 2016 the first time. But Darren or David, do you all want to give the first like a little intro to Papers We Love?
So it was myself and Darren and Zishan and a number of other people were at a small web development agency in New York City in 2014, I think it was, or 2013, 2014, in that range, trying to do an internal papers reading group. And if anyone's ever done that at a small company, you know that it's hard to maintain interest when you have 30, 35 different developers, all of whom have various, day job, they're working for the actual company. They don't necessarily have a chance to sneak out and read the papers as well. So we did a couple internally. They were, sparsely attended. People wanted to be able to join, but didn't have time. And so a decision was made, well, what if we tried to open this up to the larger development community in New York City at the time, see if we can get a little more critical volume, critical mass by doing it that way. Our very first one was hosted at a what was that company name?
Vigil.
At Vigil, at Vigil's offices,
Vigil.
which is a sort of sister company of the parent company that owned the very complicated corporate structure. Don't need to get into that. And we had Michael Bernstein do a talk on was it the Unified Theory Garbage Collection? I seem to recall correctly.
Yep, that's right.
Unified. Yeah, Michael Bernstein, whose name will come up, I think, throughout these histories. And was on the first episode of this podcast last week. On the first podcast, and then things kind of took off from there. I think within a month we had some folks in San Francisco reach out and said, we want to do this too, launching Papers We Love 2, TOO. And then other places started reaching out and saying, hey, we want to host one locally. Can we do that? And we said, I guess so. And from there, an international movement was born.
Yeah, and we had if I can add just a little bit of color, if I remember right, there were some very early conversations before the first New York City meetup. I know, Zishan and Darren, you were there at a Closure West event. I think maybe in 2012, if I'm getting the year right, when you were first noodling the idea of having sort of like a collaborative space for people to share interesting research and papers they were implementing or fascinated by or inspired by. And so that's a little footnote that I remember that ties it into some of the conference work that Alex has done over the years for sure.
Well, that was after. So that was after our first meetup in New York.
Oh, was it?
And we were at Closure West, and that's when the San Francisco cats did their first meetup, and we got to go to their first meetup because we were in San Francisco for Closure West. Got it. It was wonderfully serendipitous.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And I think at the highest point, to highest points with numbers, I think we had 30 plus-ish chapters at one point, kind of normally having meetups in a month. And this is obviously a time too, like the Lambda Lounge stuff Alex mentioned, like the days where meetup.com was like everybody was joining meetup for various things. I was just telling somebody here at Carnegie Mellon about meetup.com, and they were like, what is that? Maybe that's, I don't know, that this showcased how things were different at a different time.
It's certainly a shell of its former self now. That's easy to say.
I think that's a pretty good history on things. I think one thing I'll speak for myself, obviously, that Closure West was the beginning, and actually one of the talks that I think really hinted toward where we wanted, I started going to Strange Loop and stuff as well. But one of the talks at Closure West that I remember that kind of really fit, the Papers We Love mindset as well, was Alex. You had John Hughes, I think, keynote that Closure West of that year that we went. And, even though it was a closure conference, you had this, person, John Hughes, who was not necessarily affiliated with this language, but talking about quick check and papers and all these really awesome things, talking about it from a much, from, I guess, like a higher abstract level of this work and how people use stuff. And obviously he was talking a lot about the Erlang quick check stuff that he was working on at the time. How, like, in going from, you already had Strange Loop by that point, but I guess the question I have for Alex here to start is, how did you see Strange Loop? How did you begin to morph Strange Loop from kind of its early Lambda Lounge days into like what it became in 2017-18 when it got really big, and then to now? Like, how did things kind of change? Because obviously from a speaker's perspective, it really did.
Yeah, I think the Dirty Seekers, it's always been what I'm interested in. So plus maybe a few additional things to make it a little more broadly marketable. But but really the bulk of it has been topics that I was interested in, and I didn't really try to work too hard to get outside of that. It seemed like there were enough people that were interested in that. But definitely programming languages and databases were both things that I was involved in, interested in, talking about a lot when it started. And it was also just a unique time in the industry when people had open minds more so than they did before or after. And so I think that's the reason it had resonance at the time. And then I think we've added topics that seem like we've tried to continue talking about topics that are sort of edge topics. So, I think we've added more security content, more AI content, things like that over time.
Can you, I think labeling those as edge is interesting. And I also, you kind of glossed over the ways to make it marketable. Can you maybe expand on that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, initially I had this feeder audience in Lambda Lounge, so I knew there was an audience. Like, I knew 150 people who were in the market for content around emerging languages and databases. So I knew that was at least a big enough market to have a conference on. So I think that's the core of it. But
right. So being marketable was really just like know your audience. You're like, oh yeah, there's 150 super interested people in this. So probably there's n times 150 that if we put it on, will come on out.
Yep. And that was borne out. I think, and I'm sure that you feel this pain very closely right now, but I've launched 3 conferences and helped out with several more. And the first year you do a conference, you have to over communicate literally you have to tell everybody about it 10 times more than you think you should have to. You guys just having launched this, I'm sure feel that immediately, but that first one is hard. And the way that I marketed it, this was the heyday of the early Twitter, I would say. And so right. I did a lot of that. Right. And I did a lot of actually traveling to user groups within a 300-mile radius and talking and then doing a little spiel about Strange Loop at the end. And those are the 2 things that I did to market it, really.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It's very interesting that you had the Lambda Lounge feeder there of like, I know there's at least 150 people within driving distance who come to a thing regularly. I can at least bank on them showing up, probably.
Yeah.
Super useful.
And then my other big conference advice is when you make a new conference is that the first one really has to a primary goal has to be that you're alive to do another one after that. So, and I didn't really have that knowledge when I did the Strange Loop, which was the first conference I ever worked on. That became much clearer later on. But and I was really I managed to do that purely by luck and accident the first year. And if I had made some different choices, it might have, I might have ended up in a much different place and never done another conference. But it was mostly accidental. But it's important.
Yeah, obviously one thing I think about, and this is, speaking a little bit from Papers We Love, and not to sidetrack, there's a lot of other fields, and obviously I think distributed systems, you mentioned, databases came really close, but it seemed like, and particularly the first years I went to Strange Loop, and where I think we started in Papers We Love, again, trying to do a reading group and then putting that through New York, was, we were also really in the programming languages. I remember 2012, Strange Loop, you had the emerging languages workshop, right? I think that was 2012.
It was 2 years. I think it was 11 and 12. But
11 and 12, yeah,
that's right.
And then the one I went to that I remember was, it was crazy. It was like Jeremy Ashkenash
It was nuts.
Talking about CoffeeScript. Yeah, it was David Herman on Rust. It was like, yeah, it's Rust even now.
And really, I had nothing to do with that other than creating the space where it could happen. It was really, primarily organized by Alex Payne, who was at Twitter at the time, and other good folks. And I didn't get the speakers. I didn't run it. I didn't plan it. All I did was incubate it as an idea. And that's something that we have done throughout the life of the conference. And it's always been a really nice thing. And that's how I got into the Papers We Love thing. Is I hear people pop up somewhere and say, it'd be cool if there was a place where 50 people could talk about this weird niche thing. And I'm like, oh, that's adjacent to Strange Loop. I think people will come out for that. So, those pre-conference events almost always are. I mean, they've been run in a bunch of different financial models, from sort of a completely independent model to sort of a integrated model, like we've done with Papers We Love, to ones where I really sort of took care of all of the financial aspects of it. And I don't think I've ever made any money on any of those. So it's that's not why we did it. It's really about getting the right people together and around interesting ideas. And that's the most important part of it. It's more important than the talks even.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part, even though I think in Papers We Love, we touted a lot about bridging academia and industry, and we brought in a lot of academic speakers, particularly at the conferences. But for me, Strange Loop was my first kind of exposure to people from academia talking about crazy language things. For example, like I think when you had Will Bird and Dan Friedman generating programs in Racket. That was, I remember, one of the earlier when I went. And so, to me, it was like that actually really inspired a lot of the Papers We Love stuff, because we were seeing, because there was two ways. I think when we started Papers We Love, it was about people in industry getting guided up through papers and through themes and research. And then it was like, oh, actually, academics actually want to talk about other work, referential work, or work that inspired them, and they want to have that. They want to have that opportunity. And so you had both I'm an industry person who came across these papers that changed the way I thought about things, or changed how I built something. And then you had, academics who were like, I really want to tell you in more detail to this different kind of audience that I don't get to typically speak to, about why I think my work, or work that has influenced me, is actually important, right? And so that's kind of how it seems like the synergy of these things kind of came to be, right? You were already kind of doing that as Strange Loop, but I think was new to me, for sure. Who, had been in school for other stuff, but never computer science.
Yeah, that was always the goal from the beginning, was to bring together people who were in industry and people who were in academia, who I was talking to on Twitter, but lived in very different worlds. Mm-hmm. I thought having them talk together would probably be useful in both directions. And plus an additional sort of dollop of things that were inspiring, weird, arty, humanities, that kind of stuff on top, to me is that's what makes it an interesting conference. And that's why Strange Loop is like that.
It's one thing we've talked about a lot in the Papers You Love sphere as well, of sort of what drives a lot of us as organizers, easy for me to say, to sort of be interested in computer science papers and do this work. Because I think of all the four of us on this call, anyway, from papers, none of us have CS backgrounds. I think that's correct, Darren. I know you have a master's in sculpture. Zishan, you went to film school. I just have an undergrad in English. I think that's correct for everybody.
We didn't say Chaz.
Yeah, I don't actually remember.
No, I'm a degenerate dropout.
Oh, there you
honestly.
go. Yeah, none of us have any CS backgrounds, and yet we're here working on, like, we're working in industry, and then I think it's probably too strong to call it. I can't think of the name for imposters. It's too strong to call it imposter syndrome, probably, but I think there's a big interest in feeling that we do this stuff with tools and jam together libraries and all that, but like you can feel the ocean beneath your feet. And you want to understand more of the roots of what you do as a for your day job type of thing. That it drives, I think, a lot of, at least my interest in computer science papers. I don't know if there's a question in there. I think it was more of a comment.
Well, I think there's a piece here definitely about credentialism and some of the discussion around academics versus non-academics, and in general, not the phrase "I could never understand that," but kind of like, could I understand that? Question mark. Because the path really has been thought of as well. You need to go to computer science to understand these things. I have a computer science degree, but I am usually the less technical person because I went down a path of talking to humans and doing producty stuff and community and events and other things like that. And I also went to school in the mid-90s where you could graduate with a computer science degree without knowing how to program.
Right, yeah, back when it was more of an ED thing, right? Almost.
It was well. This was some of the challenge. I was there right at the turn of that, where programming, like most of computer science, was algorithms, and that was the work we did. But we ended up in the early foothills of like learning OO design patterns. I had a software engineering emphasis, so I ended up doing a bunch of programming. But I graduated with people who didn't. And then in industry, and this is like the foothills of Web 1.0 or the peak of it, was a bunch of people who didn't have programming backgrounds, like EEs, where we're like, but you don't know the algorithms. But everybody just slammed together whatever they could because the demand there was to build things. And of course, at some point, you want to bring the academic theory back around to people who are like, okay, but this is not a Python toy algorithm. This is what the limitations are of this in the field. And I think it's really important to bring those things together.
Right, going from ad hoc knowledge to something with more of a foundation in knowledge of what the actual physical limitations, like what the information theoretic limitations of your systems are, as opposed to just merely, well, this library does XYZ in this time span type of stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. The theory of O log whatever. And then the like, okay, but can we actually write code that does this given the limitations of databases, bandwidth, processing power, etc.
Yeah. I was going to say to that too. I think, one thing that Alex mentioned as well, I mean, we talk about the academic computer science part, but the weird part is something we also try to keep in papers we love, or look at fields that don't get as much broadcast, I guess, over more of the typical things of what people get into. Chaz always, when we're curating papers we love stuff, Chaz is always like, yeah, but like, try to focus on something different even from the computing aspects, right? So that's where we brought in like people who've done music analysis stuff for other stuff, and even people from fields that are not academic who have somehow, mashed together a bunch of different ideas and a bunch of different themes to put something together that's really unique. And Strange Loop always have those great, talks with, have like live performances, things about audio, things about visualization, and various forms of things. That's something that I think also not having, for papers I love people, at least maybe not having computer science backgrounds per se, we're also really interested in like, what are the other mixes of things from people from different groups and different sets of work, right? I think is really important. I don't know if you're going to say something, Chaz, to that.
Say that out loud. Go ahead, Chaz.
No, I was just going to say, in terms of towards what Zishan was saying about the, to a certain extent, emphasizing interdisciplinary touch points of computing and the technologies that we use. as Zishan was saying, I'm often sort of knocking around, sort of agitating about logic programming is great and distributed systems are great, and I love all these things for what they are. But and you see this coming more to the fore with the obvious impacts and influence that like artificial intelligence and the training regimes that go into those sorts of systems, and what the outcomes of those imply to access to those technologies, and implicit and inherent bias because of different training sets, et cetera. So there's all kinds of different tendrils that you can explore about how technology interfaces with sociological factors,
yes,
public policy, legal and sort of extra legal factors about the impact of different technologies on civil society and stuff like that. So, and I have to just in terms of tracing back the lineage of where that interest from me comes from, a lot of it is from my experience with a conference that is now defunct called Theorizing the Web, which had a great run in the same timetable as when Strangeloop was really peaking, I would say, in terms of its reaching out for like the really out there sort of avant-garde technologies in sort of the mid-aughts. Theorizing the Web was kind of doing the same, but reaching towards where those interconnections lie between technology, sociology, effects on communities, public policy, privacy, and all those sorts of topics. Was run by a couple of people that did like a staff sociologist for Snapchat, and around a lot of the first waves of the controversies around Facebook and the impacts that social networking and social media had on society, families, teenagers, et cetera. And so that community really focused on where those seams lie between technology and sort of everything else, if you want to demarcate things that way. And I always wanted to try and bring that over as much as possible into the more technologically rooted communities that I was in, just because very often there's an absence of even awareness of the non-technical impacts of the things that we work on, when a lot of the focus is just on solving interesting problems, building worthwhile companies, having good working environments. But there's this generally a pretty vast expanse of relatively unexplored territory, at least within what is generally constructed as a tech conference, quote unquote.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I helped found a conference in Vancouver called Polyglot Conf, and part of the theme of it was sort of the programming language wars are over, and we should come together, and we have lots of like shared needs and challenges, and we should talk about that. And very quickly, it was done on conference style, and very quickly, basically, as of year 2, many of the technologists from the regional area who came wanted to talk about non-programming topics. And Chaz, you talked about some of them right away. The like, how do we work better as teams? How does that work, and so on. And I think the inevitable conclusion is, if you keep going, of course, you stop talking about the telephone as technology, and you say, what does it enable? And the same thing here. And so maybe always the open question, what is the good parts and the bad parts of this cool new thing that you're doing, of how it touches humans generally?
Yeah, and there's one of the most memorable talks I went to at that conference, Theorizing the Web, I think it was in 2014, was one that addressed the nomenclature that is often used within tech communities about things being magic, and that kind of going back even to the Dragon Book and SICP and wizardry and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of sort of semiotics rolled into how technologists relate to technology, and thereby how non-technologist lay people relate to both what we do and ourselves as a community. And you see this come up all the time in terms of the sort of lionization of the most financially successful technologists as not just titans of industry, but genius scientists and things like that, and the kind of credibility and social currency that flows from that in terms of giving them leeway to spread influence way past their stated and historical areas of expertise. So we should probably reel back from the
we could spend 3 hours talking about the ethics of
rat hole we can do on this topic. Yeah, for sure.
Probably.
Exactly.
Though I think obviously at the modern where we are, right, these are the questions that I'm thinking about a lot. I mean, I think we all are. That was seen in Causal Islands as well. And I know it's been even throughout other conferences and even Stranger over time. I think some of these questions come into place. One thing I wanted to kind of get to in this too. I mean, I think more people involved in computing is really important. And, one thing I wanted to maybe have Alex at least talk about that I think is really great. And we've been big proponents of this for Papers We Love for a long time, but the opportunity grants that you've done, Alex, like as part of Strange Loop, which I think is really geared to exposing people obviously of all different backgrounds and stuff more toward a conference like Strange Loop 2, not specific languages, not specific platforms, but much more general computing stuff, much more weird, awesome stuff. And I know other conferences have this, but I feel like Strange Loop was the one that really took it at a really interesting level and obviously exposed people to a lot of stuff. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about when you kind of started, obviously moving toward more opportunity grants and how that kind of whole, how all that came to be.
Sure. So definitely diversity and topics like that were not on my mind when I started Strange Loop. So it was just it was a long time ago. I was certainly not as mature as I am now, and it just was not a thing that even I don't remember that even entering my mind really. There were no women speakers at the first Strange Loop. Which I'm embarrassed to say, but having looked back through it, that was definitely true. But I did have an ever increasing interest in that, and considered it to be a priority pretty soon after the first one, and that just kind of grew over time. And I remember clearly I was spending some Saturday morning working through a bunch of Strange Loop stuff, and I was just going through each speaker, like checking all their stuff on the computer and doing all that stuff. And my daughter was kind of watching me, and she was, I don't know, probably 7 or something at the time. And she's like, "What are you doing, Dad?" I'm looking through verifying all the speaker stuff. And she's like, "Why are they all men?" And it's like, okay, well, that's a pretty good point. So out of the mouths of babes. So it was something that the opportunity grants was a way to sort of proactively change the ratio of what was happening at the conference, and not just get people that had the money and the access and the privilege from having been at these big tech companies for a long time and all that, but to allow people to come to the conference that could not do that otherwise. And it seemed like once we started to get to a certain size, it was clear that I could raise money to do that, and that I was making enough money that I could support that directly. And so I can't remember which year we started that. I want to say it was about 2015. And I will also credit Bridget Hillier, who came on to the team around awesome. 2014, 2015, around that time frame. And she really shared this. She came to me with this idea, and I already had the same idea. I was like, okay, you're coming in, and we're going to do this. And so we figured it out. And there were a couple of the big years there where we had 2,000 plus people, where we had over 130 people, I think, that we brought in on opportunity grants. So that's like 130 awesome. Tickets, and it was travel for a big chunk of those people. So it was hotel and airfare. So it was a lot of money. Like it was, $40,000-$50,000 of, travel and hotel and all that kind of stuff. But that's not a crazy amount of money to raise with a conference of that size at that peak time. So it worked economically. And then we got involved with Project Alloy, who was trying to do the same thing, but kind of a bigger industry scale. And we kind of worked with them for a while. We're not working with them at this point, and I'm not really sure what's going on over there right now. But it's just the pandemic was rough in that area. So that kind of broke the model a little bit. Numbers, so we're a little more
perspective. That's as many people as you'd expected to have attend your first year, isn't
it? Yeah. And so the amazing thing was that what we have seen is that people who come on the grants, and I mean, it's not obviously everybody, but people who come on the grants, they come back 2 years later, and they are at some company and they convince them to sponsor the conference or to sponsor the opportunity grants, or they come back and they're a speaker at the conference, which we've had a bunch of times. One of our keynote speakers here this year, Taylor Poindexter, was a grantee many years ago. So
that's awesome.
Like that kind of, you see it, you see the sort of, it takes 2 or 3 years to see the echo, but it was huge. And it just changed the whole feeling of the conference in terms of who's allowed to be here. So it was a big signal.
Yeah, I mean, what I want to like now, one thing, and I've been to other conferences, some specific language ones, of course, and academic ones a lot more now. But for me, when I think of Strange Loop, I think it's, it's like all the, especially, as you said, 2014, 15 going forward, all these aspects to put together a good conference, which is, especially for people who are not there, like really good video and audio, the captioning and accessibility stuff, the stuff that, White Coat captioning and stuff has done, and like all the cool, amazing, it in itself could be a talk, how they do captioning. It's really amazing, and obviously a really good point. Obviously opportunity grants, like now it's like, as we move into a world where, people might have to run, who would run the next kind of conference in this way or this kind of general way, or even conferences are there. And I think conferences have done pretty well. Bang Bang Con has done a lot of great work as well in this space. I think most conferences have, kind of the underpinnings of all this, but I probably hadn't seen it all come together like it had Strange Loop, and obviously we took advantage of that stuff when we were doing PWL, or as we've been doing PWL with Strange Loop. But to me, it's like, if you're going to run a conference now, obviously it takes some money, of course, but these are all the things that you really need to have and think about, right? With accessibility, diversity, and then how do you actually make these things happen, right? Instead of just saying it. So yeah, I guess kudos, but also like it's kind of amazing that that's the pinnacle that I think of now, at least for me.
Well, I think I don't know if it's pinnacle, but I think we could do better still. But I think we did.
Oh, 100%, 100%. Right.
Strange Loop contributed to the industry moving in a different direction there, and so I'm proud of that. And I'm proud that some of the things that we were one of the first people to do is now considered sort of table stakes for a lot of cases. So that's good. I think we've moved the expectation window. So I'm happy about that. And the other thing that we did back in that time frame was we consulted with Ash Dryden, and he put together a list of I don't know, 140 suggestions for ways we could, improve the diversity of the conference. And Bridget came to me and said, okay, which one, we got this cool list of things we should do. And she said, what do you think we should do? And I said, well, we should do those. So we attempted to do all of them. I'm not sure that we completely succeeded in all of them, but we tried. And I think that was, it was just let's just try to really push this and see, if we can take it to a different place, which I think we did.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and honestly, I think for me at the time, seeing it grow every year was really amazing. And I think, obviously from the Papers We Love perspective, I mean, we essentially took all those things, or even when we were working on Causal Islands and Benson knows this and Boris, right? It was here are all these things, obviously we might not have this much sponsorship money or not, but these are all the things we kind of need to have in place, right? Just to even be at the level to start thinking about even other new things that we want to do. And so it kind of maybe gets to, I don't know if it's skipping too ahead, and Boris, you can tell me if that's wrong. And I also want to see if anyone in the audience has stuff, but kind of gets to, I think, the questions toward this is the last Strange Loop. This is right now it's the last PWL aside right now with Strange Loop for sure. We're thinking a lot about that. We've been talking a lot about that. Where do you, and this is a little bit of the question, where do conferences go now? Obviously there's hybrid pieces, which I know are very messy. Generally, we've had these conversations before, I think even on the first podcast. Where do you kind of see things moving, or where should things move for how we think about conferences, both at the format of a conference, what it has, but also what initiatives should maybe even take place, or what would you like to see, or for others who would take on these bits?
Yeah, I mean, I think the pandemic broke things, like it did so many things. And I think we haven't figured that out yet. And we really changed the economics of things. People are just used to doing things online now. That expectation changed during the pandemic. I think people's awareness of the climate impact of having hundreds of thousands of people fly to someplace is different now. But then I will also say that I think we as a society discovered how awesome it is to be with people too, which is completely contrary to both those things. So
yeah,
I don't know the answer to it.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
I have some ideas, and I think you talked about this a little bit on your last episode. As a fan, I've listened to all of the episodes of this podcast. But I think thinking about distributed things where people can be locally present with other people, but not necessarily travel long distances.
Yep.
I think that is an incredibly interesting model, and one that I actually have worked up multiple extensive budgets on it. I believe it's a totally workable model financially, and it's something that is facilitated now by things like movie theaters being able to host events like this. There's venues for it. I think a lot of companies now have venues like small theaters or meeting rooms, or things with sufficient AV and net to do stuff like this. And if you're a sponsor, coming to an event like Strange Loop gets you in front of a lot of people from all over. But if you're interested in if you're a hybrid company or a local mostly company, a lot of those people are not in your market, so right. What better sponsor experience could there be than hosting, being the local host for the local Strange Loop affiliate or something like that. Yeah. And inviting people into your company. They can see the culture, they can see the environment, they can hang out with people at your company. Like, that's a super high contact, high value sponsor experience. Yep. So if you can have them then, put money in from there as a sponsor, I think they're getting a ton of value out of it for the right people in the right places. So like, coming up with a way to do that at scale, and you could host talks from anywhere. Like, imagine a conference that was a multi-day thing. So you had people show up and give talks from all over on one day, and then you had a day off, and then you had people, like, you're not going to see all of those talks. You might have talks only happen locally. But then people vote on what was the most impactful talk you saw. And then those people came together and presented, at a bigger scale to people all over. Something like that. And then you had another day where it was discussion about that. Or something like that. I mean, like, you could come up with something here that I think you could come up with a conference format that leveraged local and leveraged remote for the things they're best at, and got something that was cooler out of it, that was bigger than either of them at the end of it. So if I were going to go put a lot of energy into making a conference, that's what I would work on. But I've decided that I'm at a point where I'm ready to take a break from putting that energy into it. So,
Alex, I feel you're like pandering to me at this point, where I'm like, yes. I actually want to go.
I want to inspire people to go off and do those things, and I think people, like, I'm fielding constant questions about, why are you not doing Strange Loop anymore, right? So, like, I've been doing it for a long time, and so, like, I have put on the event that I wanted to put on over and over again for years, and I'm not the only, and we started talking at the beginning about how putting a conference that you want to see is, like, that's a great thing. If you can find a market for that, like, that's great. You know how to do that better than anyone else. But, I'm like an old white guy who's been doing programming for 30, 40 years. So there are other people in the industry who have other backgrounds, contexts, environments, histories, who I think have more, other relevant and interesting viewpoints other than mine, and I would be happy to see those people say things and make a conference. And I'm happy to help people make conferences. So I do this all the time. People come to me and say, could you, help me think through an idea for a conference? I'm happy to do that. I'm not gonna, for free, I will get on a Zoom with you, and if you're, really seriously working on an event and you want some opinions, I'm happy to, tell you what I know, and you could take it or leave it.
We'll put Alex's home phone number in the show notes, so just stay tuned for that. It's amazing. I mean, I think there's a lot of important things to touch on there, to bring back to even some of the things that are happening locally. So I agree with you when you say that the pandemic broke a lot of things. I've seen it also break regional meetups that look more like the Papers We Love things that happen everywhere. So
we got hit hard.
I just hosted a D-Web Toronto meetup yesterday, and I'm starting it up in Vancouver, and I feel like I'm starting from scratch of remember when we used to meet together. But what was really great is some of the people who were out last night actually came to Causal Islands, which was in Toronto this year, and they said, so we're kind of thinking that was lovely, and we think Toronto would be good for this. So I know you kind of said that you guys wanted to travel around, but we maybe still want to do a Causal Islands in Toronto. And I'm like, amazing. Yes, this is exactly what I wanted to happen. Hence the islands in the name, by the way. And I think we have to try these things. And we're in this still in-between period where everything from reigniting regional, local, monthly meetups to playing around with the form of the conference is so important. And at the same time, Alex, I literally just looked through the about page for Strange Loop, where I'm like, I'm just cut and pasting this entire page. I agree with all of this. Traveling for a 1-day conference, forget it. It should be 3 days. And I'm sending this around to various people. So I think there's a balance of these things where those of us who have done conferences for a really long time both need to leave room and uplift other people who want to do new things. And then if we have a little more opportunity, we might be the ones who go like, okay, we need to try something to learn, which I think is kind of part of our tech industry, or should be more of. Which also, of course, means that you need to find good partners on the sponsorship side who are like down for, we're going to try something new.
Yeah, I was going to just add to that because I think Alex, and I know you've said a lot of these things too, Boris, right? Are hit in the right direction. I think when we've thought about it, I've thought about it for sure. I could say the amount of coordination to make it feel obviously it's like you have local variants, but to make it like still feel like there's something that attaches as a whole, right? That coordination seems heavy, particularly in a world now where a lot of the companies that tend to sponsor have their own conferences, which is I think a thing that makes it somewhat difficult. And then I think that the amount of work to coordinate that is really good. I mean, obviously, one thing I've talked a lot about, we've talked a lot, even particularly like David and Chaz and me too, and Darren. Format, presentations. I know Boris, you brought up like, what if you had a conference that was you have the talks. Actually, academic conferences did this particularly around COVID and stuff, where you have the talks pre-recorded and then people get together and have Q&As and stuff afterward. Because we have video and all these things. But what are different formats that people can try? Because I think if we're gonna do this kind of remote coordination, this large scale event, which I think is even in some ways more large scale than a large physical event, to get it to feel like, again, part of the whole. What are the right kind of formats and things for things to work together? Because academia has tried hybrid. I mean, had to, because people have to publish, and it's part of the working paradigm for a PhD, for example. And they've done hybrid, but it tends to be where, like, when I've been on the remote ones, people miss the talk, so they only see the couple they want to see, and there really is that kind of lacking, group kind of effort to really get along, really go deep on stuff, and still be exposed. I mean, one thing that Strange Loop has done, or even we've tried with some bounds on papers we love, is exposing people to different ideas. And what happens a lot in the remote cases, they won't see the talks they don't care about. Where sometimes you can force them, especially in a single track conference or a couple tracks, to have to see something that would be very new to them, right? So I kind of wonder how what are the options that people can really come to or try out, or what are things?
Yeah, I mean, to look back a little bit as well, like the DevOps Days model is another approach to a conference where DevOps Days, it's almost like a franchise, right? DevOps Days New York, DevOps Days Austin, DevOps Days Milwaukee. It's smaller conferences that are all the same structure, but then run locally, recorded and shared as a sort of full brand. It's like, hey, you want to come to see DevOps content over time, you come to your local one, you have a local community, but it's part of a larger movement. I also think it's always very interesting to me because they are, I've been to a couple of those, and those have always been sort of fantastic. Not just the talks themselves, but also they do birds and feather stuff, which I have always found really great.
I think there's, I mean, birds of a feather, like boff. So, like I have found that the kids today, when I say things like boff or birds of a feather or even unconference,
these kids today, let me tell them,
they look at me.
These the youths of the world don't know. They don't know the classic ways of the conference. Apparently,
this is for real conversations where I've had like really interesting discussions with folks, and they're like, "Oh, that sounds really interesting. Do you have like some reading that I could do of like what is, because I haven't experienced it?" And I'm like, right. We have to like keep going and pushing our like principles and experiences forward, right? So Alex, for that matter, like that realization of you saying like, oh yeah, I should probably focus on this, and then fully executing is amazing. And so how much more what things do we put forward as a baseline And is there a divergence of types of conferences, ones that maximize commercialism and paid sponsor slots versus companies that want to put something else together?
Yeah, one thing I was going to say to the question too, that Darren referenced this idea of like Strange Loop exposing to like radical things. Like DevOps Days is great, and I think is a really great model. But it's very much in tune with people who are working jobs in tech, right? And so I do wonder, like I think of that Dan Friedman Wilbur talk from Strange Loop about like generating racket programs that have like generate 99 programs that say I love you. Where is is there room for that? Are you going to get enough people together to be exposed to those kind of talks, or talks about like we had Jason Hockman at Papers We Love talking about beat synthesis and stuff like this? Like, are people going to I think exposing them to that maybe is harder, like that generality, that kind of radical change or things that you would never expect. That's maybe the hardest part, where you can probably do really well with a very confined kind of view on things that really help people in their current roles, their current positions, and where they're trying to go, right? Maybe, I don't know, I'm kind of throwing that out there.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's all about positioning, right? DevOps Days is very good at the thing it does, but maybe the structure could be lifted out and used around a different topic. I think it's not exclusive to working DevOps engineers, as much as they would probably hate the term. Even every DevOps Days has a talk in which someone goes, "Well, DevOps is not a job title." So it's they have those interests too. It's not just here's how to run Puppet better. Those sorts of topics always come up. Anytime you have practitioners working together, you have people who want to talk about what does it mean to do the job. So
yeah, but also like I was talking to a semi kind of sponsor on things not too long ago, and those weird things, without having a lot of precedent, can those weird things actually drive enough sponsorship? Is also like, do you sneak them in, or do you that kind of stuff? Because obviously, to do bigger things and do large opportunity grants and to really do that stuff, you have to get that sponsorship and convince companies, right, that again, this is worth it, right? Which I think Alex did really well with Strange Loop, but it's always like a hard thing, I think.
Or you have to charge more. So
right.
Amazing. Well, this has been lovely. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really looking forward to my first Strange Loop and my first Papers We Love. Definitely, I think a lot of this discussion is, things they are changing, but at the same time saying, we figured a couple things out, and let's inspire a bunch more people to do more of the good stuff. Really look forward to collaborating more with you all and sending a ton of people to Alex's Zoom room, where 1,000 conferences will bloom.
That's a good tagline.
Yeah, and I think, as the group of Papers We Love, I would say a huge thank you to Alex for having us be a part of all of that for 5-6 years now. So just want to call that out.
Well, I mean, I'll turn that around and say that when we first started talking, like, it was clear to me immediately that you had a lot of shared vision that with what I was doing, and so it was not a hard decision. And you have to always walk into these partnerships with an optimistic heart, and hope that the other party is good to work with and executes and does what they say they're going to do, and you always have. And so that has always been very easy, and it's been a no-brainer to keep working with all of you. And I've really appreciated what you've brought to Strange Loop over the years and what you've done outside of Strange Loop. So I'm an enthusiastic supporter from that perspective.
Awesome.